This recording was produced by Oregon Trail Baptist Church. If you'd like to get more recordings, or to leave your feedback, please visit us at www.otbchurch.com or write us at P.O. Box 298, Guernsey, Wyoming 82214. We look forward to hearing from you, and we hope that today's recording will not just challenge your thinking, but will transform your life. Exodus chapter 18. Exodus chapter 18 this morning. I think we'll cover the whole chapter. Of course, I generally say that, and then it doesn't happen. And then when I don't think we'll cover it, it does happen. So, I do want to make a note. Last week we were talking about the armies coming out of Egypt, or coming out of Egypt. They weren't really prepared for battle. There is a few, actually. So I was re-listening through Exodus, and if I'm going to go to sleep, and my wife's not here so I can actually do this, she can't stand it, but I'll go to sleep listening to the Bible. And there are a few times when it talks about them leaving Egypt with weapons or with arms. So they had some that they brought with them for the battle. Okay. Now, how much, we don't know, but it is mentioned, and so I thought I better go back and just add on top of last week's lesson a little bit there. Exodus chapter 18 this week, starting with verse 1. When Jethro, the priest of Midian, Moses' father-in-law, heard all that God had done for Moses and and for Israel, his people, and that the Lord had brought Israel out of Egypt, then Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, took Zipporah, Moses' wife, after he had sent her back, and her 2 sons, of which the name of the one was Gershom, for he said, I have been an alien in a strange land. And the name of the other was Eleazar, for the God of my father said, was my help, and delivered me from the sword of Pharaoh. Verse 5. And Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, came with his sons and his wife unto Moses into the wilderness, where he encamped at the mount of God. And he said unto Moses, I, thy father-in-law Jethro, am come unto thee, and thy wife, and her 2 sons with her. And Moses went out to meet his father-in-law, and did obeisance, and kissed him. And they asked each other of their welfare, and they came into the tent. And Moses told his father-in-law all that the Lord had done unto Pharaoh, and to the Egyptians for Israel's sake, and all the travail that had come upon them by the way, and how the Lord delivered them. And Jethro rejoiced for all the goodness which the Lord had done to Israel, whom he had delivered out of the hand of the Egyptians. And Jethro said, Blessed be the Lord, who hath delivered you out of the hand of the Egyptians, out of the hand of Pharaoh, who hath delivered the people from under the hand of the Egyptians. Now I know that the Lord is greater than all gods. For in the thing wherein now they dealt proudly, he was above them. And Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, took a burnt offering and sacrifices for God, and Aaron came, and all the elders of Israel, to eat bread with Moses' father-in-law before God. Verse 13. And it came to pass on the morning that Moses sat to judge the people, and the people stood by Moses from morning unto the evening. And when Moses' father-in-law saw all that he did to the people, he said, What is this thing that thou doest to the people? Why sittest thou thyself alone, and all the people stand by thee from morning unto evening? And Moses said unto his father-in-law, Because the people come unto me to inquire of God. When they have a matter, they come unto me, and I judge between one and another, and do make them know the statutes of God and his laws. I'm going to pause here a second. Had the law been given yet? Okay. So this is kind of an interesting thing, because they have certain laws from God. Okay, clearly He's revealed some of it, but when are they going to get the bulk of this revealed? At Mount Sinai, and they're not there yet. Okay? So this has pointed some to say that they think this actually happened after Mount Sinai. It just fits the narrative better here. I don't know that that's the case, but Moses has been the one who's had all the encounters with God up until this point, right? The face-to-face encounters. He's the one receiving the law. He's the one telling the people. So what they have received of the Lord, they're on a process. They're growing here, all right? So they're all coming to him, and he's fielding all their questions, and he's disputing. He's basically sitting and acting as judge. And this is what's happening over and over and over. So he sits there all day determining everybody's disputes, trying to get them to know the mind of the Lord, and his father-in-law is noticing this, going, this is not good, all right? Where did we leave off? I'm sorry. 7? All right. Thank you. And Moses' father-in-law said unto him, the thing that thou doest is not good. That's an understatement. Verse 18, thou wilt surely wear away both thou and this people that is with thee, for this thing is too heavy for thee. Thou art not able to perform it thyself alone. Hearken now unto my voice, I will give thee counsel, and God shall be with thee. Be thou for the people to Godward, that thou mayest bring the causes to God. And thou shalt teach them ordinances and laws, and thou shalt show them the way wherein they must walk, and the walk they must do. Moreover, thou shalt provide out of the people able men, such as fear God, men of truth, hating covetousness, and place such over them to be rulers of thousands, rulers of hundreds, rulers of 50s, and rulers of 10s. And let them judge the people at all seasons. And it shall be that every great matter they shall bring unto thee, but every small matter they shall judge. So shall it be easier for thyself, and they shall bear the burden with thee. If thou shalt do this thing, and God command thee so, then thou shalt be able to endure. And all this people, thou shalt also go to their place in peace. Verse 24, so Moses hearkened to the voice of his father-in-law, and did all that he had said. And Moses chose able men out of all Israel, and made them heads over the people, rulers of thousands, rulers of hundreds, rulers of 50s, and rulers of 10s. And they judged the people at all seasons, and the hard cases they brought unto Moses. But every small matter they judged themselves. And Moses let his father-in-law depart, and he went his way into his own land. All right, let's pray, and we'll jump in here. Lord, we thank you for this text here this morning. As we look at what happens here in Exodus 18, we ask that you would open our hearts and minds to truth. Would we get a glimpse into the biblical story, and would we see principles and patterns that we can apply to our heart and lives today. In your Son's name, amen. All right, let's try to zoom out here and get big picture. This chapter fits well by itself. But how does it fit with what's come before, and how does it fit with what comes after? So, if you open up almost any commentary, they divide the book of Exodus, chapters 1 to 18, and chapters 19 to, 34? So this is the big split in the book. This chapter is the end of a certain section, and the next section. Anybody know what comes up in the next section? I'll give you a hint. Chapter 20 is the Ten Commandments. What's that? Okay, so you have the law given, and then you have the temple built, or the tabernacle at this point. You have the law given and tabernacle built, and this is the part of Exodus. Once you get about past chapter 20, that's where people start to peter off in their Bible reading, all right? It's one of those harder sections because it gets laborious. This section, verse 18, or chapter 18 here, is in some ways bridging the gap. Good morning. Let me get your hand up. What has happened previously in chapters 15 to 17? They've been in the wilderness, not the same wilderness wandering after Mount Sinai, but they've been kind of wandering through the wilderness. God has been testing them. How have they done? Not so well. If there's a victory, what is the one big victory they've had? The battle with Amalek, and Joshua wins the day. Moses and Aaron and Hur are on the hill representing God and interceding for the battle. So I think it's helpful to look at this chapter as part of the transition to the next section of the book. I have a couple of quotes here that help bring that into mind. Bottom of the front page here. In this chapter, the narrative transitions away from the wilderness difficulties in anticipation of Israel's receiving the law at Sinai. Here, Moses' father-in-law Jethro advises Moses to appoint administrators to ease his burden of leadership. Also, top of page 2 here. The story of Jethro's visit, contrast with the Amalekite confrontation. One came to fight, the other to seek knowledge. With one there was war, with the other judging or mediating for peace. With one Moses' hands grew heavy, with the other work was too heavy. The chapter has 3 sections: the setting for the visit of Jethro, the praise of Jethro, and the advice of Jethro. So I'm not going to follow that outline, but I think that parallel between the previous chapter and this one, or contrast may be the better term, is helpful. We're seeing the nation form. Okay, they are a people, but they don't have codified laws yet. We're seeing that come together. If you've seen any of the modern movies of the Bible and whatnot, it's funny how they always portray this. They portray this as if they're a bumbling people who don't have a clue what's going on, and they're just completely starting from scratch. And I don't think that's at all the case. They're not starting from scratch. They've grown up, yes, in Egyptian society, but they're not clueless to morals. Now, are they learning about the Lord? Yes, they're still learning who Lord or Jehovah or Yahweh is. They're learning how He's distinct from the other nations. They're learning how He approaches things differently. He's not fickle. He's patient. They're learning about Him. Okay, so they don't know Him fully, but it's not like they're cavemen who can barely know the difference between, Anyway, so that's where this story kind of fits in. Right at the beginning of this, our first character introduced is Jethro, the priest of Midian. Have we seen or heard of him before? Yes. Where did he show up before? Okay, right. Because when Moses flees from Egypt, he ends up in Midian. He ends up meeting Jethro, this priest of Midian. He ends up marrying one of his daughters. There's several interesting things going on here, though. Notice verse 1. When Jethro, the priest of Midian, Moses' father-in-law, heard all that God had done. How do you hear something unless somebody tells you? Okay, so we're not sure exactly what does all had done mean. Does that mean he heard about the Exodus? Does that mean he heard about some of the wilderness wanderings? We don't know. But he did know where to come find Moses. So it almost seems like there was, maybe Moses or somebody sent a courier to him. They are at Rephidim, which is in the area of Midian. So they're not far away. He knows where to find them. He comes and finds them. So it seems that Moses here was maybe initiating this communication. To say that conclusively would be saying too much, because the text doesn't say that. But somehow he's hearing about it, and he's interested in it, and he's responding to it. Yeah. Yes. Moses' Facebook did not update. They were out of Wi-Fi range. And what is his position? Well, yeah, but he's the priest of Midian, so he's got an official high position, and he has people under him, is what I'm getting at. And so it's not unlikely that reports coming from other people, even if Moses didn't send a direct correspondence, he's hearing this. He's getting bits and pieces of this, and he comes. Now, who comes with Jethro? Who does he bring with him? His wife and kids, all right? So this brings in some other things, because in Exodus 4, with the wayside event with Zipporah circumcising their son. It was okay. That whole debacle and event. Obviously, she was going with him to Egypt at that point, and somewhere between that point, she leaves and she's with Jethro. So, did Moses think it too dangerous? We don't know. That's a gap in the story. We don't know. There are some who go to the thought that Moses was actually divorced from his wife here, and it's a long, complicated. It's like, what? Really? But probably for safety and probably just for practicality, Moses here, he's gone to Egypt. He's endured the plagues. He's been there he's brought Israel out of that. And now it's time to get his family back together. And guess what? He's now brought Israel where? They're not quite at the mount yet, but they're really close to the vicinity. And isn't that where, in the burning bush incident, where God said, all right, this will be my sign to you. I'm going to bring the people back to this mountain. Okay, so God has redeemed His people. He's brought them out. He's doing what He said. It's a sign. And so they're coming back, and now that He's coming back to the area of Midian, where Mount Sinai is, okay, and then in me saying that, don't say I'm saying that Sinai position is actually Midian. There's a huge debate on where exactly Sinai is, but it's in the vicinity, all right? We're close enough that Jethro, he's coming. They're bringing the family. They come. We have here a couple instances, the naming of his sons. Gershom, for he was an alien in a strange land. Why was Moses considering himself an alien? Do you remember that part of the story? Yes, okay, so he got kicked out of Egypt where yes, he's a fugitive running for his life because he killed a guy, and now this gives Pharaoh a good reason to go after him, and so that's the naming of his first son. His second son here is Eleazar, for the God of my father said, He was my help and delivered me from the sword of Pharaoh. So, I'm not sure if that's referring to delivering from the sword when Pharaoh's pursuing him, or if that's referring to something later, but it could be either way. So those are the names and the meanings of the names for his children here. Alright, so what happens? Jethro shows up. Would you say this is a cordial, nice greeting? Is this hostile? What's the tone of the meeting here? Okay, seems nice, seems cordial. Moses does all the appropriate things to greet him properly. He gives obeisance or acknowledges him. He kisses him, which I'm glad that's something we don't do in our culture. All right, just what that is, Middle Eastern culture. They share a meal together. Verses 7 and 8 kind of go through some of what's happening. They're going to catch up over a meal. It's interesting in these verses. Look with me, if you would, at verse 8. And Moses told his father-in-law all that all that the Lord had done unto Pharaoh and to the Egyptians for Israel's sake, and all the travel they had come upon by the way, and how the Lord delivered them. And Jethro's response is he rejoices at this. Did Moses limit his telling to the good things? If you look at chapters 15 to 17, most of those chapters, were they good or bad? Okay? Yeah. They're good because you see who God is and you see His patience and kindness and loveness. They're bad because you see the children of Israel and you see their response. And I really thought it helpful what Douglas Stewart noted on this. He said, a tendency exists in the modern evangelical testimony, or what we share about our experiences and events, to emphasize only victorious, successful parts of one's experience as a believer. Note how something of the opposite prevails in Moses' discussion with Jethro. He told him about all the hardships they had met along the way, not to the exclusion of telling them how the Lord had saved them, but with a proper balance of the difficulties and the deliverances, lest this potential convert wrongly think that God does not allow His people to face many dangers and trials in the process of their ultimate deliverance. I think that's helpful because I don't mean to pick on missionaries, but what missionary letter is going to tell you all the problems they're facing? And if they do tell you problems, they're going to color them. Okay, and I'm not calling them a liar, but they're trying not to spread dirt about everything else going on the field. And so, in a big public setting, in a public way, that's appropriate. But here, Jethro, Moses, he's not sugarcoating it. He's telling them what's happened, telling them of the difficulties, he's telling them of the victories, and he's moving forward with that. This is deep. Okay. Yeah, if there's a... Are you thinking like in the need where like maybe a church could fulfill, like if they put on a needs list? Is that the type of... I mean, that's what as you said that, that's what I was thinking of, but I'm not... Yeah. Right. And I don't mean to be down on missionaries for that because there's a propriety issue. But I think what I'm more getting at is the presentation of walking with the Lord that removes all pain and suffering and trials and tribulation. Today we might call it a prosperity gospel, where if you trust the Lord, if you do this, God, you will be blessed. And behind that idea of blessing means you're going to have money. You're going to have a nice house. You're going to have a nice car. Life will go good for you. Is that always the case? Yeah. Yes. Right. And this is happening in his tent. This is not happening as a huge communal thing with all of Israel, right? So this is a private meeting, which sets the tone a little differently as well. Yeah. Yeah. Right. Right. And sadly, and all it does is it desensitizes you to the problems. Because when you get problem after problem after problem, and it's just listed and listed and listed, you just get to the point I can't care about all these problems, so you don't care about any of them. You know what I'm saying? And then I'm gonna pick on social media. It's really stupid to me how people will post like, I'm eating a hamburger. It's like, thank you for sharing. I don't care. Let me unfollow you, because if that's the stuff you're going to put on, I have better things to do with my life and time. People ask me often, did you see this on Facebook? Probably not. No, probably not. So. That's probably true, because this is... He is condensing what probably is about a 3-month period into one dinner conversation. All right? So he can't say everything. We know that just by time constraints. He can't tell them everything that's happened in the last 3 months. How would you condense your last 3 months in a dinner conversation? You know? So that's what it'd be tiring, yes. Now, go ahead. she could see right through it, couldn't she?
I had to share very personal things through this summer, and I have never seen him so Christian.
Right.
And she said something to me not too long ago that my mother said it, which was she acknowledged that God existed.
Yeah.
She did not acknowledge the fact that within a church, you have unbelievers in the church. And it was just like, I had never even heard my mom acknowledge that there was a God. And so I'm not saying, this was just a private conversation.
Right. Is helpful. Yeah. The same may be true when it comes to even apologetics. I can't remember who. He does a lot with apologetics in modern world, and he talks about let me get it right, a doubting to faith. And it kind of sounds odd, but Christianity and what we believe, it shouldn't be, okay, I have rubber stamped everything here, and I just believe that, and I don't think about it. And any counters to that, I just don't even care about. I just believe it. But there's an element of, no, I'm going to look at the details. I'm going to look at what's happening. I'm going to trust God. That's where I'm going to be. But I'm struggling with this aspect. And for a believer, there's times in our life when we're going to struggle with, God, why is this happening? And I'm not trying to question you, God, but I just don't know, and I don't know how to respond, and I don't know. And there's a doubt, but it's a doubting towards a faith. Because we want to have faith, we want to have trust. We're just not sure how this event is working out. So people see through cookie cutter facades. I remember this all the way back. We had a song we sang in our Christian public school or private school, and it went something like this: "Apple red happiness." I don't remember. It goes through all these candies and different things, and how wonderful the Christian life is. And then we got to 4th grade, and that teacher would not allow anybody to sing that song. And it was because, no, that's not. The Christian life is not a sugar-coated, wonderful. Is the Christian life wonderful? Yes. But does it have trials? And tests? And tribulations? Does it get weary? I mean, that's where God hasn't pulled us out of this world the moment we get saved. We're still in it. So the Christian life we still endure that, except the difference now is we are walking with Jesus. We're not walking alone. And so I think there's the next part of the lesson here, getting to Jethro's response. I think the interesting thing is what you said about your conversation with your mom. That's what's happening with Jethro. Because before, the discussion in chapter 4 was, and for whatever reason, so many secular scholars and even some of the movies that portray this, they portray Jethro as the one teaching Moses about the Lord. And Moses then getting that knowledge, and Moses moving on. But they forget this passage here where what happens right after Moses tells him all these events. Verses 9 to 11 here. And Moses, I'm in chapter 17, sorry. 9 to 11. And Jethro rejoiced for all the goodness which the Lord had done to Israel, whom he had delivered out of the hand of the Egyptians. And Jethro said, Blessed be the Lord, who hath delivered you out of the hand of the Egyptians, out of the hand of Pharaoh, who hath delivered the people from under the hand of the Egyptians. Verse 11, Now I know that the Lord is greater than all gods. This really sounds and seems like a conversion point. Now, to take a step back, again, I'm not saying as a priest in Midian he had no concept of who the Lord was at all. But it could be that he's moving from believing there is a God to believing, okay, this is, which also here, in him stating this, he was probably skeptical of Moses' whole plan to begin with. He allowed him to go. When Moses came to him and approached him about it, he sent him with his blessing. But he's sitting back, probably going, "I'm not sure about this," because here he now knows this is the God, this is the Creator God, and so we don't want to press how much does he know when he knows it. But at this point, that's what many look at and see, and I would agree with. This is his conversion point, where he now realizes this is the God of gods.
I don't know if it would be conversion on his part. I think that whenever you see verse 10, I've proved God in all his power, and all of a sudden, you know something different. And even as a believer, if God were personal in your life, he's saying, hey, major decisions, changes, if you know what to do, what does anybody else God doing?
Right.
You know God. It's totally different way.
And he's moving from hearing about this second and third hand to hearing it from the horse's mouth. Not to degrade Moses, but he's moving from hearing about it through maybe correspondence, or maybe hearing through as the word spreads among the nations, because hey, there's this large group of people roaming out there who just left Egypt and left Egypt a mess, and people are hearing about this, and so Jethro heard. He's moving from that to sitting down with the man who's leading, who's in the middle of it, right? So, it definitely spoke to Jethro. Yeah.
Well, you know the word's getting around because 40 years later, when the two spies go into Jericho,
Right.
Jericho's in the city because they're right outside the city.
Yeah. And Rahab's, yeah. Right. Rahab's comment is, "We're all in fear and trembling because of you."
You know the word's getting around and everybody knows it. That's part of what I always have a hard time. Everybody around them sees it, believes it, but yet inside Israel, 2 days later, they're out of water.
Yeah.
It's so hard to believe that it's so hard for them to see.
Isn't that true of us too? We can look at someone else's life and we can see God's hand, even though they're in the middle of a struggle, and we can see, okay, God's working this, and I know that this is hard for them right now or whatever, but this actually could have some good ramifications if the Lord would open their eyes to this. And obviously the Canaanites are not praying that way, all right? But the same is true. That's why Gibeon, that's why they tried to make a treaty with Israel so they wouldn't get wiped out. In the story of Samuel with the Philistines in 1 Samuel, that's what the Philistines are concerned about. Man, we know what happened to Egypt. We don't want to mess with this God, so let's send his little box back, and let's put some golden mice and golden tumors in it, and send it back, and that's what they do. So the word is getting around, it's spreading, and yet they're in the middle of it, and they're kind of, But often in our own personal lives, we miss the blessings God is doing because we're so focused on the problems. And so, middle of page 3 here, Jethro was such a prominent public leader among his own people that the story of his conversion could serve as both an encouragement to the Israelites and an example to them of the importance of allowing faith in the only true God to spread to others. Now, even if Jethro wasn't converted here, when he goes back to Midian, he's in a high official position. He's now going to take anything he's heard and other people have heard, and is he going to confirm or deny it to his people? He's going to confirm it. He's going to, so at least that's our assumption. There are times in history where people deny it and they keep it personal, but he's going to affirm that, and so there's a testimony going outward here through this action. Something's brewing. Yeah. And as should it. That's part of glorifying the Lord. So Jethro then, they have their nice meal, they go to bed. We have nothing in the text about them going to bed, but I'm assuming they went to bed because it's what you do at night. All right? They get up the next morning, and what does Jethro observe? He's now watching Moses' routine. And he sees him, verse 13, sit and judge the people all day long. And so then comes their next evening meal, and I'm kind of picturing this for you. And he's like, hey, this isn't so good, bud. What, Pastor? Let me see, verse 12. Why did I leave verse 12 out? I don't like it. That's just, oh no. And Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, took burnt offerings and sacrifices for God. And Aaron came and all the elders to eat bread with Moses, his father-in-law, before the Lord. A couple things happening in verse 12. No really good reason it was left out. But basically, they're making offerings and sacrifices. So, if I got it right, the sacrifices would be kind of like an atonement for sin type thing, where Jethro is, I'm going to take the position as a new convert. So, as a new convert, he's making like a sacrifice like they would. So they knew some of this system already, or God had revealed it. But then the offerings is kind of like, and this gets into Leviticus in that language, but the offerings is more of a housewarming present. Don't get me wrong, but there's offerings that go before the Lord. When you're coming into God's presence in His house, you bring a present and a gift. So the sacrifices were consumed. The offerings, what happened with them was they were shared as part of the communal meal. So Moses, the elders of Israel, Aaron here, there seems to be a separation between what happened with Moses and Jethro in the tent and their conversation, and then all the elders are involved. And it could be as simple as, while the elders are being fetched, Moses and Jethro are having this conversation, and then once they get there, they have a big meal together. No good reason it was skipped. So, it was probably one of those, I was so close to getting it onto 4 pages that it was squeezed. Anyway. So let me understand the question. Would it be a big deal because Aaron and the elders were there eating a meal with him as a Midianite? Okay. So I'm going to put that in the context, because that does get discussed. In the context of they haven't received the law yet, and so they have no command from God to isolate strangers yet from worship of the Lord and Yahweh. So in them, including him, I don't see a problem there yet. There's also an element with him being a Midianite. They're still coming from kind of, if I'm not mistaken, through Keturah and some of the others. They're still connected back to Abraham. And this gets complicated quickly, but God had been using other lines from Abraham to take out certain people groups as well. There's kind of a purging and a cleaning already taking place. Amalekite and Amalekite become names of not just a people group, like an ethnic group, but it almost becomes a name like for some a derogatory term, and for others a positive term. Okay? So, I'm trying to think of a term we would use that way. Okay, this might fit. It may not be the best, so sorry if it's not the best. For some people, the term redneck is something to be proud of. And for other people, the term redneck is not a good term, all right? So, Amalekites, they just faced them. They were tied into other groups, and there's a connection between them and giant clans with the Zanzumim and the Zanzumim and the Amalekites and Og of Bashan, and there's a lot going on here. And we haven't touched this in Sunday school because it's just part of it's above my head. I'll just put it there. But God had been using even the other Abrahamic family lines, Edom and some of these others. He's using some of them even to take out some of these giant clans preparing for the conquest of Canaan. And so they don't do the full job because Israel still encounters giants in Canaan. But to say all that, God in choosing Israel didn't push everybody else away. So even Jethro, he's coming from a line of Abraham where it's hard to think that they would have lost all of their remembrance of Abraham and his God. Even though they're not the chosen line, there's going to be a memory there, and what that level is, we don't know. So at this point, they're kind of kissing cousins, coming together to some degree. So I don't think there's a huge issue there. Were you thinking there would be, or? Yeah, so. Right. Right. And so, yeah. And there's, let's get into another thing. We'll touch it and then we'll be done and we'll just pick up the lesson next week. Okay. The elders here are connected to tribal units. Okay. So you have how many tribes? There's 12 tribes, okay? And the elders get connected to the tribes. So these are elders among each family, clan, out of all the clans, 12 clans making up Israel, all right? However, there's no hint that in this judicial system, it was based off of that. Now, we do know that priests and Levites were at points involved with the system from later texts, but it doesn't mean that all of the people who sat as judges and rulers were priests and Levites. So this seems to be, it could have followed the tribal allotments, and that makes the most sense to me, but several scholars have noted that it doesn't seem like the judicial system in Israel strictly followed the boundaries of the family tribes or clans. So, with that, why don't we pick up with verse 3 next week, or not verse 3, page 3b. Any comments or questions? I told you, I thought we'd make it through, and I knew we wouldn't, so anyway. Again, view this chapter, if you pull this chapter out by itself, and I had to spend a lot of time thinking about this, because how does this chapter fit? You're seeing a progression between them being a people moving through the wilderness and them being a nation, okay? And they are a nation, but just like when America got our independence, did it happen in a day? Did codes and laws and everything all happen in a day? No. It took time. There was a development. There was a time frame for that stuff to happen. And I think that's part of what's happening here. So next week we'll pick up with B, and then I'll probably start another lesson next week because I don't think that will take so long. Let's close in prayer. Father, we thank you for your word. And Lord, as we look into the life here of Moses and his encounter with his father-in-law Jethro, Lord, I ask that we would be a people who are honest in our testimonies. Not that we share everything for everybody, but that we are open and honest to share the good and the bad. We don't sugarcoat what it is as a Christian, but that through the honesty and the openness and the faith, others see you. And whether as believers their faith is stirred and encouraged, or whether as unbelievers they are drawn to faith, I ask that you'd allow our testimonies to do the same. Lord, as we have looked into this passage here, I ask that you would encourage us to listen to the advice of others. As Moses here listens to the advice of his father-in-law, would we also not try to lead alone or be alone, but rather would we listen carefully to those leaders, to those who've gone on before. Would we heed their lessons and testimony? We ask this in your Son's name. Amen.